speak to it, please. And the motion would be, I move that the Libertarian National Committee encumber $15,000 for an Alaska petition drive and litigation in 2020.
Second.
Second from Mr. Hagan. Do you need to speak to it, Bill? Or
I would. I would just say that I don't think we'll have to spend that much money, but the proposal, I think we should be prepared to spend a reasonable amount that is necessary. Obviously, we thought we'd spend a whole lot of money for Illinois this year and didn't spend a penny. I think there are going to be other situations like that, but I just want to know that the money is there to cover Mr. Weiss's expenses, and also if Scott Kohlhaas can actually pull off a 5,000 gross sig petition drive, that the money is available there for that. But frankly, I strongly doubt that we will end up spending anything close to 15,000 total. Nonetheless, I'd like to ask for that in comment.
okay, Mr. Goldstein, I see seeking to be recognized. Go to Mr. Goldstein.
Oh yes,
I've got point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chair.
Parliamentary inquiries privilege. Go ahead.
I had a computer glitch. Did that last motion pass without objection?
The Maryland one, the budget one did.
Okay, I didn't
because
have
it was just
that.
changing the line item on money we had already spent.
Okay, I don't object either, but I didn't hear that. So, okay, great. Thank you.
No problem. Go ahead, Mr. Goldstein.
I've got a couple questions. Mr. Redpath, was this money allotted for in the budget request that we passed back in December?
I do not recall offhand. Okay. Let me look at my report, and I will tell you that question.
Okay. Question number two: how much, if any, is the Libertarian Party of Alaska going to contribute to this effort?
Well, I would ask Jon. I defer to Jon Watts on that.
Well, at this point, we have about $3,000 in the bank. And of course, relative to our liabilities, we'd have to compare that. So you can see it would be less than $3,000 to some amount.
But you do have some skin in the game, right?
Well, we certainly can.
Okay. And then my final question is on the contract you proposed, Bill. It looked to me like the final payout was before he reached the $5,000 signature mark, or was I misreading that?
It was $2,000 in 5 increments. I'd have to go back and double check that. I do not know that.
He's got a chart right here that says $4,000 is or 4,000 signatures is a final payment of $2,000. I don't see anything in that part of it about having to attain 5,000 gross signatures before getting his final payment. And I would have a problem with that personally. It's on the last page of the proposed page 2 of the last contract you printed out and sent out. Initial down payment, and then for each additional 1,000 signatures, another $2,000 until he gets his final payment of $2,000 when he reaches 4,000 rather than 5,000 signatures.
Let me get to that. Sam, in a moment. Sure. There was nothing specific for Alaska. I asked for $235,000 in the LNC budget. It came in. I forget exactly how much it was reduced from 235. I believe it was reduced from 235. No, excuse me. I'll take that back. It is 235. 235 is the budget for 2020. Okay.
Correct.
Yes, 235 is the budget. I specifically, I did not include Alaska specifically, adding up to 120,000, but then I put that we added another $115,000 for contingency. Now I will say of that 120 that was enumerated by various states, 62,500 was for Illinois, and that turned out to be 0. So that's the situation. Now with respect to the Kohlhaas contract, hold on here. Yeah, I mean, he's asking to be, what he's doing here, Sam, is he's asking to be fronted $2,000 before he starts, he's being fronted $2,000 for each 1,000 signatures. So he wants the final payment before he gathers the final 1,000 signatures.
Right, and that's what I have a problem with.
Okay.
But on the other hand, honestly, Bill, I don't know this guy. If you know him and trust him and he's worked for us before, then I'd probably be willing to accept your word on it.
Please accept my word on this. Scott has been around for 40 years in the LP.
Scott helped Ohio raise money for our drive.
No, you're out of order.
Sorry.
All right. Mr. Goldstein, are you done?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any other discussion from members of the executive committee? Seeing no one seeking to be recognized, are we prepared to move to a vote?
Yeah.
All those in favor, raise your hand. Why?
Oh, you mean electronically?
I did mean electronically. Or, I mean, we could do it roll call, but.
We can't do it electronically for panel. Well, I can't. Sorry, everyone else
see
can.
yours.
Okay.
Why don't you just ask for objections?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we'll do that. Does anyone object to the proposal? Seeing and hearing no objections, it passes. Good, that was simple. Is there any other business for the executive committee?
I just wanted to say this, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, do we have to authorize the lawsuit? Or was that part of your motion?
That was part of the motion.
Okay.
Actually, I mean, I'm willing to do. I wasn't aware that it was a part of the motion. I don't think it was, but I'm happy to move that right now.
I could read the motion. It said for Alaska petition drive and litigation.
Oh yeah, but we have to authorize the lawsuit.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood. Thank you.
Because
That would
under
need
the
more money
bylaws,
than $10,000 or $15,000, wouldn't we?
it may or may not. But
No, I mean, I don't think Mr. Weist's expenses will exceed 5,000. Do you, Chris?
Mr. Weist, go ahead.
I do not.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So Mr. Redpath, can you just make a motion to authorize the lawsuit to?
Yes, I will so move. The Libertarian National Committee authorizes the lawsuit. Now, just as a technicality, I'm not sure the LNC will be a plaintiff. Maybe it will. But just in case the LNC is a plaintiff, I would move to authorize such a lawsuit.
Okay.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Is there any discussion on the authorization of a lawsuit in Alaska? Seeing none. Is there any objection to that motion? Hearing none, it passes. Now, is there any other further business for the executive committee?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say, if I may, that I will doggedly pursue local counsel in Alaska between now and Monday.
Much appreciated. Yes, I mean, I see no reason not to stay in the room. It's not going to be a different. I apologize to everybody for not. I would have rather have done this in that virtual convention space that Dan had been working on. It's actually a much smoother process than this webinar format. The webinar format has so many limitations, but because the registration link had already gone out and it was configured as a webinar, the only way to do it would be then to create a new instance, send out a new link, and then we would have all of the problems people have had with, it takes a while or it got stuck in the spam folder or whatever. And it just, with Sam, you had announced this meeting, I think, 3-4 days ago online? You're still muted, Sam, sorry. Sam.
Yeah, I was looking at Mr. Went's chart here. Yes, as soon as Dan posted the link, I put it into the delegate group so they would be aware of it. And then I just found out today that the 100-person limit has been magically disappeared, and we have a 3,000-person limit. I'd love it if we ever got to that.
Yeah, well.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Is the executive session adjourned?
Oh yeah, sorry, we need to adjourn it. I apologize.
Okay.
Is there any objection to adjourning the executive committee meeting? Hearing none, we're adjourned at 11:50.
Okay. This executive needs to use the bathroom.
Okay, good idea. I'm actually going to get some water too. Mr. Merced, you have the control of who speaks and is recognized until I get back.
Okay. Cool. Does anyone want to speak?
You're going to have a pretty easy time.
John here in Alaska. Great to see you guys, especially you, Alex.
Hey, John.
Do you have further need of me at this point?
I think not for the purposes of the executive session. So I mean the executive meeting. So
The executive committee meeting's over. So John, if you want to, I don't need you with anything with respect to Alaska.
Right. We can talk offline about whatever else we can do. Well then, a good day to you, gentlemen and ladies. Take care of yourselves. Stay away from the bugs.
You too.
Not back yet.
Come on, bud.
This may be a question for Dan. I see Ms. Adams is in the attendees list and not a panelist, and she and Mr. Thrasher have their hands up. I don't know if they, especially Ms. Adams, may want to be promoted to panelist.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Tim. That is precisely why I had my hand up.
Dan, Betty Rose Ryan, and Daniel Hayes, and Ken Woolman also need to be promoted to panelists if they're not already.
The LNC meeting, so I think my mic's on, so don't say anything.
Oh, maybe Aaron lost hers or something.
All right, I am back.
No, I used mine, but I came in
I'll go grab some
prior to the start of this meeting. I came in during the last meeting. So during the last meeting, I was solely an attendee, and it kind of, that was the hitch.
Dan, Josh Smith is raising his hand as an attendee.
Yep. So I have Mr. Thrasher seeking to be recognized. Go ahead, Mr. Thrasher.
Oh, my apologies. I was actually seeking to be recognized for the public comment period.
So this isn't technically public comment yet, although it is my intent to do a substantial amount of public comment because it seems like the public has comments. My thinking was we have a good bit of time, so probably 20 minutes, since that's about how long it took last time for people to talk at the time that the meeting starts at noon. Can we find out the 205 number that ends with 622, what can that person be recognized so we can put a name on them?
Mr. Fishman, Jeff Hewitt just called me. He was having trouble finding the invitation.
Paul Frankel.
Great.
205, who was that?
Paul Frankel.
Paul Frankel. We'll get your name updated.
And Mr. Chair, a technical question.
Yes,
when someone is recognized, thank you. When someone is recognized, is video going to come on, or is it just going to be audio?
You know, I don't think we can do video for attendees in webinar mode.
No,
I don't know. Yeah, I think if you're still just an attendee, it doesn't turn into video. And Dan, if you could make that 205 number Paul Frankel. Richard Brown is recognized. Mr. Brown. Oh, he put his hand down. Oh. Utah, Justin Bake, and then Richard Brown. Go ahead,
Sorry
Justin.
about that. I didn't mean to raise my hand. I was adjusting something on my phone.
Okay, go ahead. Richard Brown, go ahead.
Okay, now I can speak. I didn't have a microphone a while ago. I cannot see all the panelists. All I can see is the speaker when I go to full screen. I don't know if that's the way it's supposed to be.
Not sure.
That's a limitation of the webinar version.
Does anyone
It's
object?
also limit.
Stop. Thank you. Does anyone object to having Mr. Brown promoted to panelist so that he can answer any parliamentary questions? I mean,
No
he would be
objection.
recognized. Huh?
No objection.
Mr. Fishman, if you could promote Mr. Brown to panelist.
Mr. Fishman,
He's working on some other things.
I just want to make sure this is being recorded, that's all. Thank you.
And then it starts streaming out in 3 minutes. Is that right, Dan? Oh, okay. So good. We're in. Is there anyone else that members of the committee think, well, no, I think we've got the whole LNC and the alternates in as panelists.
Is the convention committee members all in as panelists?
I think so. I see Betty Rose, Daniel, Aaron,
Ken,
Whitney, Sam, and where's Ken? Is he in there? I'm just not seeing him.
Ken would be the only one missing by that role that you just gave.
Let's see, Mr. Molman. Not seeing him.
I don't see him anywhere.
All right, if
He's
somebody
not
wants
here.
to shoot him a message just reminding him, he may be run up to last minute. I know everybody's been busy.
and when it comes time for the presentations from the various venues we're going to present, they will be promoted to panelist status so they can interact.
I believe so, yeah. All right. And Dan, can you change that name on the 205 number to be Paul Frankel? And then mute him. All right, and then Mr. Winger's microphone needs to be muted. Thank you. All right. We are about a minute out. Still don't see Mr. Molman.
I can.
Okay.
I can call him. If you don't want me to, I won't.
I would assume, I mean, everybody's known, so my guess is he's either having a technical difficulty or he's coming in under the wire.
Question, my screen seems different than last time. I'm not seeing a hand raise button.
Open up your participants window. I think, isn't the hand raise there?
Ah, there it is. Got it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Does anyone else have any technical or privilege issues before we get started? It's just about noon. I'm going to assume since it's noon and we're starting, that the hand raises. So I'm going to open this up, the meeting, call it to order. I will start with public comment at the beginning for, I intend 20 minutes, and then we'll move into business. Ms. Bilyeu, go ahead.
Wait until after public comment.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Perry from New Hampshire.
I'll be keeping time, Mr. Chairman.
What was 20 minutes?
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Perry.
I just want to remind all of the LNC members about the various messages that I know that they have seen that have been sent in, not only by myself, but others that have health concerns for themselves.
Well, Mr. Perry, stop for 1 second. Yes. Mr. Frankel, please mute your phone. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Perry.
Again, want to remind LNC members of the messages that I know they've received from myself and others that have health concerns for themselves or for their loved ones who might be immunocompromised, and remind them that online convention is perfectly within the bylaws, and I ask that they not sacrifice member safety and member rights in appeasing Saint Robert, the patron saint of writing the absolute worst book ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Christopher Thrasher, then I have Brandon Nelson on deck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise this morning to remind the members of the LNC that the use of executive session is to be limited to such confidential discussions as employee performance and compensation, legal strategy, and delicate financial matters, and is not appropriate simply when the members of the committee would rather not have the sausage making be seen. The matters before the committee at this time are of grave importance to the entire membership, and as such, I would implore the committee to refrain from going into executive session unless it is absolutely necessary. Secondly, I wish to note that if there is to be a resolution or language submitted to this committee on behalf of the Bylaws Committee, it should be noted that the entire Bylaws Committee, as of this moment, has not seen it. As a member of the Bylaws Committee, I cannot, just for the record, this is not a commentary on any language that might be submitted. I might, in fact, agree with every single word. I might agree with none of it. The fact is we have not seen it at this time. So I just wish for the committee to note that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize Mr. Nanna.
Let me unmute myself. Ken said he didn't have a link. I sent him a separate link. I don't know if it's going to work for him or not. Just excellent. Awesome.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson, and if Mr. Perry and Mr. Thrasher can put their hands down, that would be nice. Mr. Nelson, and then I have Ms. Ryan on deck after. Mr. Nelson, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. I just wanted to take a moment really quickly to thank the members of the COC and in particular Mr. Hayes for all of their hard work, and I hope that we can come to a decision today regarding the convention. Hope you guys hear them out. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ryan?
Yes, I realize that the COC speaks with one voice, but personally, I would like to see a hybrid convention where we vote for the officers and such. I talked to Laura. She said that the meeting went well yesterday. And I've gotten several notes saying that they do not want us to sacrifice the safety and health of people that have other people they have to be concerned about, not just themselves, but other people. And I would urge the committee to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ryan. Ms. Robeson, and then I have, after Ms. Robeson, I have Mr. Phillips, and then after Mr. Phillips, Mr. Craig.
Hi, thank you all for hearing me. I just wanted to ask the committee to think about the fact that there are many people that do not want the hybrid. They want to try for an in-person convention. I've polled the delegates in California. I've also spoken extensively to the executive committee, and we're all of one mind that we need to try having an in-person convention per our bylaws at the postponed date that has already been talked about and approved at the last meeting. And I just want to urge the committee to think about that when they are doing their votes, and also hear out the COC. They've done a lot of hard work trying to get things together, and they need to be heard, and thank you.
Ms. Robeson, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What was the result of your polling of the delegates?
It was not a formal poll. I only did it with emails. I don't have an exact. There were some that wanted hybrid. There were some that wanted only online. The majority of the ones that I contacted, and it was random, I just sent it out to my delegate list, and I got random responses. So it's probably mainly people that have a strong opinion, but the majority were for postponement and doing this per our bylaws, if at all possible, especially with the case that in California, although I'm sure it could be dealt with, we do have the situation where an affidavit has to go out per our rules to the Secretary of State to have our candidates on the ballot. And I know this is something that we've brought up. We passed a resolution on this, and I hope that the committee had looked at it. But this is an extra wrinkle where the Secretary of the State Party, or I'm sorry, the National Party, would have to give an affidavit of our nominees to be placed on the ballot per our rules. So I think that that's also something that should be definitely considered. And I believe there's 24 other states that have that same situation.
Okay, thank you. I had Mr. Phillips and then Ms. Ryan, if you could put your hand down.
I just would like to remind everybody that our delegates expect us to make a decision today. We all have opinions on what it should be, but we need to be prepared to be here until we have a decision and not be kicking this can down the road anymore.
Thank you. Mr. Craig, and then I have Mr. Hagan, then after that, Mr. Harris. Mr. Craig. Andy Craig. There you go. And you have to unmute yourself. Andy.
Can you hear me
there
now?
You go.
Sorry. Well, I'm a California delegate. I'm not sure what poll that was referring to. I just want to emphasize for the members of the committee that we have no idea what legal restrictions or what the health risk will be for later in person. So if we're going to conduct any critical business that has to be conducted this year, it can't wait to an in-person meeting that might or might not ever happen, that the legal restrictions are being updated two or 3 or 4 weeks out at a time. So we have no assurance from any of these cities or states that we're looking at that the convention will actually be allowed to happen. And so if you tell people that they have to make hotel rooms and flight arrangements and all the rest of that, that is the high degree of uncertainty you're pinning on it. And anything you're putting off to that meeting, to that in-person convention, you're saying you're okay with it not happening this year. So I would just emphasize that. And I would also add that, the health and safety risks are real. It's not just people being terrified of the state. It's not people being weak or cowards or some of the other things that have been suggested. Our state parties chose their delegates to make these decisions, and they should be allowed to make these decisions. And I urge you to look very skeptically and ask what kind of expert advice went into these social distancing protocols that are going to be proposed at these venues. If any kind of public health expert has actually reviewed them, you should ask to see that report. So thank you.
I was just remembered that in this format, Ms. Harlos, when did you put your hand up? Was it before or after Mr. Hagan?
After.
Okay. Then I'm just going to make a note that after Hagan comes Harlos when I get there.
Sure.
So Mr. Hagan, go ahead.
I see Mr. Bishop Hinchman is also in the attendees list and should be promoted to panelist.
Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Good. Mr. Hagan, did you want to speak as well, or are you just helping?
Just trying to help.
Thank you. Mr. Harris, and then also Mr. Craig, can you put your hand down? And then I have Ms. Harlos after Mr. Harris. It was Eric Harris. but maybe, how did the hand go away? Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to say a couple of things. Firstly, I'm appreciative of all you guys' hard work in this delegate matter, but I want to speak for an online convention. I feel like we like people said, we don't know the future, that we might not even have an in-person convention due to a second wave or a economic impact of it. So I was just want to speak to that. I think as a delegate and as a member of the Libertarian Party, that we should try to make a online convention possible. Thank you.
Thank you. I have been not calling on you because I didn't know if is your hand just still up from before? Or were you seeking to be recognized? Ms. Billiou? Were you?
Yeah, I was the first one with my hand up, but I thought we were doing public comment.
Yeah, we are. No, so if we're doing public comment, I just want to make sure you didn't want to be recognized in public comment because there's no way to tell the difference between the hands. So,
no, I'm waiting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Point of personal privilege, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Goldstein.
Since we can't see most of these people and I don't know everybody, could we please ask them to say what state they're from and if they're a delegate or alternate?
Sure. Mr. Brown, or sorry, Ms. Harlos. Then I have Mr. Weiss, then Mr. Brown, then Mr. Valente. Go ahead, Ms. Harlos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since polls were brought up, I am aware that several other polls have been done, and it seems that the results have been very consistent, with delegates favoring all in person or a bifurcated convention by far over all of the other options. Of course, the sample sets are limited, but in the limited sample sets, this has been consistently the result. I would like to address the uncertainty principle. We are always going to be uncertain. That is the nature of life. You know, the giant asteroid 2020 could win tomorrow for all that we know. I know that's not quite as likely, but the fact is, if we're going to be practicing these test runs as we have been doing, if it comes up that a convention actually becomes impossible, we will be ready to pivot on very, very short notice to an online convention, and we will have the blessing of our bylaws if there's an actual impossibility. So to me, it seems to me it's very clear we should continue our test runs, perfect it, and have that in our hip pocket in the event that a physical convention becomes impossible.
Thank you, Ms. Harlos. Mr. Weiss. So we have Chris Weiss, and then on deck, Richard Brown.
Mr. Chair, point of personal privilege before
Yes.
Mr. Weiss.
Yes, Ms. Adams.
Can we please ask everyone to mute their cell phones or their screens? That's very distracting.
Yes, when I see it, I stop it. But anyone who's on cell, please mute your phone.
Mr. Chair, just very, very quickly, we did poll our delegation as well. Our delegation, 10 of them out of 11 desire an in-person convention. Personally, I am okay with a hybrid model in which there would be a follow-up ratification convention. I'm against any splitting of the agenda between the LNC elections and the presidential elections, because my fear is if we do that, we're going to risk ratification based on people who show up. And I have a personal concern about, and I'm going to be required to do this, Mr. Chair, so are you, so is our national secretary. We have to do it at the state level for our electors. You folks have to do it at the national level, but we are required to make a certification to put our candidates on the ballot in Kentucky that we conducted our convention in accordance with our bylaws and constitution. There's a statutory provision for that. I think we get there with a ratification convention, but if the ticket's not ratified, that's a problem. So I wanted to just express, support for a bifurcated model or an in-person convention. Thank you.
Mr. Weiss, please stay there because I want to respond to that concern specifically because you do come from Kentucky. it is my ruling that an online convention would be a convention held according to our bylaws. And so if a convention like that was held, it would be held subject to the bylaws, and this Robert's Rules ratification of something that was done outside of the law that is then brought into the law doesn't come up, because the interpretation of the bylaws makes it an actual convention at the beginning with no need to ratify. That's my ruling as chairman. Mr. Weiss, does that clarify for you at all, or?
I understand your ruling. I've
Okay.
read Rob, and I don't believe a state court judge that's popularly elected sitting in Frankfort, Kentucky, would agree with you. But I understand your ruling.
Yeah, I get that, and we'll definitely sue Kentucky if it's a problem.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Hewitt cannot get into the meeting. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm getting panicked messages. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Fishman will work with Mr. Hewitt. Mr. Brown is next, and then Mr. Valente. Go ahead, Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown, are you still? I cannot hear you, Mr. Brown.
All right, let's try it this way. Can you hear me now?
Better. Yes.
Just out of curiosity, I did not see a chat box. Is there no chat box this time? And also for those who don't know me, since you wanted people to identify themselves, I served as the parliamentarian for the 2016 and 2018 conventions, and presumably for this next one, if and when it occurs, by whatever it means it occurs.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. The chat is disabled for this one. It was very distracting last meeting and very unpleasant. So we didn't want that unpleasantness because we want to learn from our mistakes. Mr. Valente, I'm just letting people know there's about 3 minutes left for the 20 minutes that I had suggested. I have about 13 to 14 people left to be heard. I intend to extend public comment until the people get to be heard on an issue of this import. Mr. Valente, go ahead.
All right. Thanks. I'm West Virginia Delegate Chair David Valente. For me, there needs to be a decision made today. We need to make sure that because the issue that I'm running into is a lot of people are having to rearrange their leave that they've taken for this convention. They're having to rearrange care for family members. They may have to make plans for if there's a required required quarantine period and things like that when they get back from the convention. So these are things that we need to consider. I am an advocate of an online convention, failing that, and a hybrid convention for the first part of the convention being the elections, and then the second part being the platform and bylaws is my second option. But at this point, I'm favoring an online to ensure as many people can participate as possible, especially our immunocompromised people and people in the high-risk categories.
Thank you, Mr. Valente. I have on deck Mr. Sheets, and then Ms. Adams, and then Dr. Everett. Go ahead, Mr. Sheets.
Just to be clear, there's several of us who are state chairs who are talking together and willing to help make whatever option it is you guys choose on today a success. And that's all I wanted to put forth.
Thank you, Mr. Sheets. Ms. Adams, and then Dr. Everett, and then Mr. Oliver. Go ahead, Ms. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a comment from someone watching on a live stream and was asked to read it in, so I'm going to read it in. This is this individual's comment and not mine. And
do they have a name?
Christopher Olinsky.
Thank you.
He says, has anyone mulled over that should the LNC choose to allow for hybrid conventions now that it sets precedent for future conventions, meaning I can do this from my couch this year, no biggie. I'd like to put forth that even though we have a moral and ethical duty to uphold bylaws, rules, and order, we also have the honor of being capable of imparting our own spirits into this situation. I believe we have the responsibility to preserve the age-old tradition of physical personal interaction. As far as Ms. Harlows, I don't think by any means she's being accused of hijacking, that's her intent. I believe any interpretation of any rule or bylaws left ambiguous should, as this specific issue, should always defer to the clear and obvious. In this case, the interpretation of location, meaning a physical location, is indeed safe and unquestionable. I stand with Ms. Harlows on this. Conversation with a trusted colleague has just raised another concern. It's on the same premise of Ms. Harlow's concern of legality. There will undoubtedly be some sort of physical meeting. There will be people who show up and those who don't. The question now becomes in the credentials of those who show. If credentialing defers to those who physically show up before those who don't, then there is an extreme danger for opportunity of infiltrators to then be seated in place of those waiting in a virtual holding room. I use our current reform issue as a comparison. Much of their strategy to take us over was dependent on the petitioning slipping through without challenge. These are two separate issues, but there is considerable similarities in theory. They, meaning any kind of infiltrator, could go to our convention, and because they are there physically, then have the opportunity to be credentialed and seated as the representative body. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Ms. Adams and Mr. Brown, if you could put your hands down. I next have Dr. Everett, then Mr. Oliver, and then Mr. Wendt.
Hi, this is Peter Everett. Can you hear me?
Yes, please. Where from and delegate?
My name is Peter Everett, and I'm a delegate from Massachusetts.
Go ahead.
I'm speaking in support of the online convention. It is very clear that anything other than an online convention at the planned time, Memorial Day weekend, will disenfranchise a large fraction of the delegates, and we are only legitimate to the extent that we represent our delegation. The idea of having 1,000 people travel across the country through airports and other public spaces is not responsible, and I don't think that it serves our interests to advertise to the world that the Libertarian Party is the party of irresponsibility and public endangerment. I get that an in-person convention would be very desirable. I would like to have an in-person convention, but it is not, it's not responsible. I get that a lot of the state and local government measures against the pandemic have been sometimes ham-fisted, and I always bristle and tend to want to rebel against these ham-fisted authoritarian measures. Nevertheless, just because a precaution is mandated by the state does not mean it is per se a bad idea. And so I think social distancing for the Libertarian Party is the right thing. And it's for all of the reasons that have been stated before by Nick and others, I think an online convention at the stated time is the best thing. Also, the bylaws exist to serve our mission. Our mission is to advance the cause of liberty, and to the extent that there is any room for interpretation of our bylaws, it should always be on the side of advancing our mission and stewardship of the party as a whole. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Everett. Ms. Harlos, is there something that I need to know about?
Yeah, I'm still, Mr. Hewitt is strenuously objecting and asked me to ask this. Okay, I'm just getting all of these messages and
I ignore them. Mr. Fishman is on it. I have Mr. Oliver, then Mr. Wendt, then Ms. McCardle. Go ahead, Mr. Oliver. Chase Oliver. Mr. Fishman, can Chase Oliver speak? No, Mr. Oliver, please go ahead. And I would ask all the commenters to try and be brief.
Hello. So I am a delegate from Georgia, and I'm rising in support of an online convention for reasons that were echoed before, namely the disenfranchisement of delegates. And, I think it's easier for us to come together online. And if we want to perhaps do presidential, vice presidential, and officer elections there, and then convene for an in-person meeting later, that's an option I would be willing to support. but I think we need to go ahead and get this done. Memorial Day weekend, we need to get our ticket nominated. Our state chair actually polled the delegates, and they preferred online or hybrid conventions. And I just think it looks more responsible for us as a party to go ahead and get a ticket out there and unite together behind and start this campaign strong. So I support an online convention because it's going to be the easiest way for the most people who are delegates to have a say in our nominating process and for our officers and for our ticket. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I can assist Mr. Fishman in allowing people talking permission so he can concentrate on Mr. Hewitt. Okay, thank you.
All right, so public comment's going to go long. I saw this actually in Phoenix when there was a really big thing with the city council. You know, everyone needs to be heard, because if they don't feel heard, they're going to feel like we're gaming this. So I am committed. We will take as long as it takes to hear from everybody. We will not hear from people twice. That's not going to happen, but we will hear from everyone. Mr. Wendt, and then I have Ms. McCardle, and then Ms. Jennis, and then Mr. Smith.
Yes, I want to be very brief. I sent out a Region 1 delegate survey, which actually had the opportunity for public comments. 39 comments were submitted. I emailed that to every member of the LNC via the business list. So I ask you to please look at those comments as they are the voice of delegates of Region 1.
Thank you. Ms. McCardle, and then I believe Mr. Smith, and then Ms. Jennis.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can, Ms. McCardle. Thank you.
Angela McCardle, delegate in California. I'm on the California XCOM, and Mimi Robeson, our chair, is correct. She did send out a poll. I've spoken with a lot of California delegates, as many as I possibly could. And to my knowledge, only 2 people expressed to me personally that they wanted an online convention. I'm in favor of an in-person convention. I am very concerned that we might risk ballot access in 25 states, which would undermine everything we've worked for and also create a great financial burden. And lastly, I'd really like to hear as many details as possible from the convention committee on their proposals. I understand that certain legal and financial things should probably not be discussed this publicly, but I hope that we can hear as many details as possible from them, because I know that they do have some proposals to present to us for in-person conventions a couple months out. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. I have Mr. Smith, and then Ms. Jennis, and then on deck, Mr. Requero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just chiming in because Judge Jim Gray is trying to speak, and I don't know if he can't find his hand-raising function or what, but he would like to be added to the speaking list.
His hand is already in. There's a long list of attendees. If you click on attendees, you can see the order, and they stay in that order.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Jennis, then Mr. Requero, then Mr. Arnold, then Mr. Jones.
Jen Jennis, delegate from California. First, I need to say I never saw that poll that Nini says she sent out. I don't know what happened. I checked my email while I was waiting, and I can't find it there. I am in favor of a hybrid convention. There are many forms that I could live with. I think it is important that we get our ticket nominated as soon as possible, and would like to see that happen as early as Memorial Day weekend. I can live either with, I also understand that it's nice to have an in-person convention. I wish I could go to an in-person convention. They're fun, they're great for publicity. I am unfortunately in a very high-risk group, and unless we're talking about something this fall, I probably won't be able to attend in person, but I don't want to lose my right to vote as a delegate. So although I would consider either splitting it into multiple conventions, having some people in person and others online, I do think we need to consider the option of having both available to us.
Thank you, Ms. Jennis. Mr. Requero.
Mr. Chairman, point of personal privilege. Richard Winger would like to speak at some point, but he cannot figure out how to raise his hand. But I just wanted to notify you of that.
I will write him in a spot very soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Requero, and then Mr. Arnold's on deck, then Mr. Winger after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Omar Requero from Florida, and I am a delegate. Briefly, I just want to point out a couple of things that haven't been mentioned. I whenever I hear someone say we're disenfranchising the delegates, I find that a little bit rude. I don't believe the LNC is trying to disenfranchise anybody. I'm a libertarian because I believe in the best in people, not the worst in people. And I believe that you guys are trying to do the best for all of us. So if it's one way or the other way, someone's going to say we're being disenfranchised, and that's virtue signaling. That's not fair. Also, in Florida, we have 53 delegates plus 30 alternates. We've had that at the last two conventions. We had full participation in Florida, in Orlando, but in NOLA, we didn't. I can't specify all the reasons why everyone didn't show up, but I was there. So there's always reasons, I guess, as the secretary pointed out, that people show up and don't show up. I also want to mention that if we have a full-blown online convention, it will take a long time. So for anyone saying we're going to disenfranchise people, guess what? You're going to be sitting in front of your computer or your cell phone or whatever it is for a very long time to get through everything, if it's a deliberative process. And I think pretty much the last thing I want to say is that if there was a motion or if there's any idea on the table for some sort of hybrid, which I guess I'd be in support of, but really I am advocating for us to maintain some sort of in-person convention. I've only been a part of just the one Zoom thing that we did the other day, and that was very difficult. It was very, very, very difficult to sit through. I could see a lot of people were getting frustrated. I think that if you guys go through it, some sort of hybrid thing, I think we should look into other options besides Zoom. I would not be in support of any motion that says LNC will use Zoom or something. You know, Zoom is a word that's inside there. Let's not limit ourselves to one particular platform. Let's look at all the platforms. And I'm not here complaining. I'm here wanting to offer solutions. So I'm the chair of the membership support committee. Mr. Fishman, contact me if you need help testing something else or testing some other software. I would be glad to assist you in that capacity, in that role. So I want to be a part of the solution. I think we all do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Requero. Mr. Arnold, then Mr. Winger, then Mr. Bishop Henchman, then Mr. Jones. Or actually, yeah, I think that's right.
All right. Thank you, Nick. I just got a couple of real brief comments. One is our mission as libertarians is to challenge the cult of the omnipotent state, defends the rights of the individual. The behaviors I've seen lately coming from some of the board members and others leads me to the fact that I stand here to challenge the cult of the LNC and defend the rights of the delegates. As such, too high-handedness from some people when they should be reaching out to the delegates for their opinions on matters. And I will stand with whatever decision this board makes, but I'm worn out with the infighting and the pissing matches that are going on. Thank you all, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold, Mr. Winger, Mr. Bishop Henchman, and then Mr. Jones. Mr. Winger. You just have to unmute yourself, Mr. Winger. There you go.
I may be misunderstanding, but I seem to hear people thinking that there's some state law somewhere in the country that requires to have a physical national convention. That is not true. In fact, in 2/3 of the states, one state parties have been on the ballot for president, and no one ever challenged them and said, hey, you didn't have a national convention. George Wallace was on the ballot in all 50 states in 1968. He never had a national convention. The Democrats picked their vice presidential nominee in 1972 in a committee meeting. Nobody gave him any trouble. This concept, even in California, it should be obvious to people. The American Independent Party and the Peace and Freedom Party on the ballot, they got on for president. They don't have national conventions because they're not national parties.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay, one more point.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll be quiet. The Constitution Party, just a week ago, had an online presidential convention. I realize they're a lot smaller. They have a lot fewer delegates, but it did work okay.
Thank you, Mr. Winger. Mr. Bishop Henchman, then I have Mr. Jones, I believe, Matthias Homer, then I have Ms. Van Horn and Mr. Bowman. So Mr. Bishop Henchman.
Can you hear me?
I can.
I have a comment from Larry Sharp, delegate from New York, that I'd like to be shared with everybody.
and I'll read it. Whatever we choose, it must include some form of in-person event for press. Sooner is best, but even as late as September, press will be critical for our candidates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop Henchman. Mr. Jones. Go ahead, Dave Jones.
Hear me okay?
It's a little crackly, but go ahead.
Okay, my name is Dave Jones. I'm a delegate from Nevada, an assembly candidate. The LP has contracted with over 1,000 people to provide an in-person convention. Now, I'm going to attend any convention that we have, but I'm really standing in favor of some sort of in-person convention. Business needs to be taken care of in a short amount of time, and I know that these online things can drag on and on, as evidenced by our last meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Matthias Homer, and then Elizabeth Van Horn.
Hi, my name is Matthias Homer, a delegate from California. I am in complete support of an online convention. I just don't buy the idea that California cares how we select our candidate for president. Let's just have an online convention in Memorial Day when everyone has their weekends blocked off. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Van Horn, and then Mr. Bowman, and Mr. Bishop Henchman, if you're not seeking to be recognized, if you can put your hand down. Go ahead, Ms. Van Horn.
Yes, I have messages from a couple of Region 3 members, and they want to know how long public comment is going to take because they want to see actual LNC business taking place today.
It will take as long as it takes. Ms. Bilyeu, is that?
If I may, I would like to have an opportunity to speak now during public comment on something that has come up, and then still have my place when we start our meeting.
Sure, I'm going to put you in after Mr. Bowman, okay?
Okay.
All right, Mr. Bowman, then Ms. Bilyeu, then Mr. Barris, then Mr. Ellison.
Okay, I believe I'm unmuted now.
You are.
First thing that we have to make sure of is that none of the presidential selection is too late for any of our states to put our candidate on the ballot. The mention of September I just heard is absurd. Mid-July and earlier will work for Michigan, no later than that. Other states may have earlier deadlines. That's number one. Secondly, I favor an in-person convention, though I probably won't be able to attend myself, but I think it's better for the party. And if it's that late, if it's a couple months from now, I've been looking at the graphs and so forth, the perpetuation of the virus will be much, much lower. And yes, there is a risk that when we travel, we will contract or spread communicable diseases. That has always been the case with every convention us or any other party has ever had. If we all of a sudden become permanent Howard Hugheses because of this, problem that we're having right now, then we can't move forward. Finally, though, we do need and we should keep doing the virtual convention iterative process of trying to figure out the best way to have one, only as a backup plan in case for some reason this thing has a second wave or there's, like the killer hornets or whatever are wiping us out or whatever, zombie apocalypse. We should have that option in our back pocket. But otherwise, we really should have an in-person convention probably in late June or the first weekend of July.
Thank you, Ms. Bilyeu, Mr. Barris, then Mr. Ellison, then Mr. Olson, or Dr. Olson, I think.
Mr. Chair, something I believe just escaped your notice. Mr. Ford has been waving frantically on the screen. I just would like to let you know.
Why has he been waving frantically?
I think he wants to get in line and doesn't know how to raise his hand, and I didn't think you saw.
I didn't. Thank you. I'm going to put it somewhere.
Okay.
I'm writing his name down. All right, Ms. Bilyeu, go ahead.
Thank you. One of the things that keeps coming up is the matter of delegates' rights. And in a conversation with a member who was actually in support of an online convention previously, not in my region, that person mentioned that an individual is not actually a delegate until they show up to convention and register. So my question is, and for clarification, perhaps the parliamentarians on board here could address it, is that really an appropriate comment to be made, or an argument to be made, that if we have an in-person convention, that delegates are automatically disenfranchised and that their rights are being violated? If they choose not to come, theoretically, there's an alternate in their place who, and I would think maybe at this point, has the exact same rights as the delegate has. One or the other is going to show up and participate or not. In an online convention, for example, whoever shows up is the delegate, and whoever is participating at that time is a delegate. However, we saw the other night, I was not able to participate last night, but the other night we saw actual disenfranchisement of delegates who were trying to participate. So I think that distinction needs to be made clear, and if there really is a such thing right now as rights for what actually are truly delegates elect. So if there's a way to somehow clarify that, just for the purposes of this ongoing discussion, so that we can dispense with some of the finger pointing and such.
I'm happy to answer that.
Thank you.
Until the convention convenes, no one is a delegate. There's an initial credentials committee report at the opening of a convention. It's the first thing that happens. What we have right now is all of the state affiliates, except for maybe most of the state affiliates, have selected delegates and alternates and placed them to be delegates and alternates by priority, so that if a delegate can attend, they get to attend. If the delegate can't attend, the alternate gets to attend. So we have a universe of potential delegates that are able to be delegates, which means that no matter what we choose, no outside whatever can get in, because we've already set the list, right? That's the total universe of people who could participate. But until whatever is convened, no one is a delegate until that first credentials report.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me for interrupting.
Yes.
This is Jim Lark. My apologies, sir. I received an email message from someone who I guess has a telephone number 240-305-5156. I assume this is Dr. Dean Ahmad. He sent me a message that says, Jim, I have had my hand raised for a long time. I'm not sure if Nick sees me. Could you please make sure I am not ignored? I think this is Dr. Ahmad.
Thank you, Dr. Lark. So what I'm going to do right now, right before we go to Mr. Barris, is I am going to read off everybody I see. That way the on deck is going to be known to everyone, because I know some of you cannot see the attendees raising hands, so no one's concerned. So I have Barris, Ellison, Olson, Nepo, Gray, Ahmad, Weeks, Robinson, Gizzarelli, Flower, Clark, DeRazio, Faust, Hopper, and Garachi. That is the current on deck. Mr. Barris, go ahead. And Mr. Ford's in there somewhere. But go ahead, Roger Barris. You have to just unmute yourself. Mr. Barris.
Yeah,
there you
sorry, I apologize. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry about that. This is my first Zoom meeting. My name is Roger Barris. I'm not a delegate. I am a lifetime member of the Libertarian Party, and I also ran as a candidate back in 2018. I am speaking today on behalf of holding a hybrid convention. I've sent an email to all the members of the LNC at the beginning of this week, I believe. Some of you have been kind enough to respond to that, basically laying out my arguments. But my view is that the LP has been disadvantaged for years because of the lateness of our nomination process. The fact that we do not nominate our candidates until May or June automatically puts us at an enormous disadvantage compared to the Democrats and the Republicans. The Democrats have already chosen their candidate. They know who it is. The Republicans have always known who their candidate is. They are out there fundraising. They are out there electioneering, even though they may not admit it. They are doing a variety of things that we cannot do. If we are already significantly handicapped, if we delay the nomination process further, then we are guaranteed to cripple our candidates come the election in November. And since one of the most important things that we can do in the convention is the nomination of our presidential and vice presidential candidates in our other offices, then what is the point of holding a convention where we deliberately cripple one of the most important activities. Now, having a hybrid convention with the other business of the convention being done at a later point also makes sense to me, because I think that is more efficiently done in person. We would always have the option, if we decided on a hybrid convention, to convert the remainder of it to an online convention, because the reality is nobody knows what this virus is going to do over the next few months. Nobody knows whether we will be able to hold any type of online convention. Nobody knows, even if we can hold one legally, whether people will actually attend. So delaying the nomination of our candidates in the perhaps forlorn hope of being able to have an in-person convention at a much later time, which would cripple our candidates, strikes me as the height of madness. Let's do a hybrid. Let's get it done in accordance with the original schedule, and let's get it done now.
Thank you, Mr. Barris. I have Mr. Ellison, Kenneth Olson, and then I'll insert Mr. Ford right after Mr. Olson. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, this is Bill Redpath.
Yes, Mr. Redpath.
May we request all public commenters to keep their comments to no more than 1 minute? I would respectfully request that.
I will also request that, and please try and be brief. I'm not going to be hard on time, but I am going to start pointing out if people are going long. Mr. Ellison, go ahead.
All right, can you hear me?
I can.
Hey, this is Brian Ellison from Michigan. And I'd just like to say that although Nick and I, Mr. Sarwark and I don't always agree, I fully support the proposal that he's put forth as I understand it. I think all things being equal, probably every one of us would prefer an in-person convention, but I think we need to exist in the reality that we find ourselves today. And aside from that, I think that whatever decision is made today, and I'd implore the LNC to make sure that we actually do have a decision today, that the members of the committee and the officers of the party would fully be behind whatever that decision is. And if they find themselves unable to support the decision of the body today, I would just ask that they get themselves out of the way rather than acting as an obstructionist, as I understand Ms. Harlows has indicated that she plans to. So I just would like to, hopefully when you guys come to an agreement, everybody's on the same page and we can actually move forward and conduct the business of the party. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Olson and then Mr. Ford.
Hi there. Thanks for hearing me. I'll try to be very brief, as everybody knows where I stand based on my Facebook posts and things like that. So I know that nobody on this body is intentionally looking to disenfranchise members, but I am concerned that moving forward right now with an online convention would do just that, because I have concerns about security of votes, overall logistics, the clunkiness of the test runs that we've had so far. I really strongly feel that what we need to do right now is set a date and location for an in-person convention, continue with the tests, and resort to an online convention as an emergency contingency. That we would be able to figure that out leading up to the date of an in-person convention and be able to hold it at the same time that we would the in-person convention. And then on top of that, I just echo the concerns that Ms. Robson and Ms. Harlos brought up earlier. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. Mr. Ford and then Mr. Nepo. Go ahead, Mr. Ford.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm reading on behalf of Archie Flower. He's the newly elected chairman of the Vermont LP delegation. Mr. Flower says, Mr. Chair, my name is Archie Flower. I write as both chair of the BTLP and as a delegate. I find no small irony in that I need this read by my alternate regional rep, as my internet is entirely wonky at this time. We speak of disenfranchising delegates, but this can happen with online or hybrid options as well. Mr. Flower continues, my commentary consists of this. I am strongly urge the LNC to opt for an in-person convention. I also find it extremely inappropriate for you to call for the resignation of officers to advance your clear agenda, which you are trying to push down the throats of the delegates. Mr. Flower says, if you want an officer to resign from the LNC, I would suggest that you do so, as you're the only member of the LNC over which you rightly have control. Mr. Flower concludes, thank you.
Yeah, well, I will note for the record that Mr. Flower is online and does have his hand up. And so I'll take him out and he just put it down. Good. Mr. Nepo.
Hello, my full name's Connor Nepomuceno, and I am a delegate from Michigan. I would like to echo the sentiment that was just put forward. I think calling for your fellow officer to resign for properly following the bylaws is inappropriate, and that having a second vote today to reaffirm a decision that was made last week after putting the meeting in recess for a full week to politic is also inappropriate. And that sounds like some of the mainstream politicking that we are supposed to be standing against. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nepo. Judge Gray. You just have to unmute there.
There we go. Yes. Well, this is Judge Jim Gray, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I am a delegate from California and, of course, a candidate for the nomination for president. And I think it's really essential that we have an in-person meeting, probably in middle July. If it can't be by middle July, as we say, don't put it in your rear pocket, put it in your hip pocket to have an online set at that time. But we're going to lose momentum. We're going to lose the attention for our issues. It's simply something that we should do everything we reasonably can to have an in-person meeting. Jeff Hewitt, who, by the way, Mr. Chairman, you didn't mention his name as being coming along, but I can see him here. But Jeff Hewitt's, the idea is to have it kind of go in tangent with Freedom Fest in Las Vegas. I strongly support that. I think it would help our party, help our movement, help all of our campaigns. Those are my thoughts. Thanks for hearing from me. Don't forget Jeff Hewitt.
Thank you, Judge Gray. Dr. Ahmad?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you. I sense that there's some concern that not that the states have laws against a virtual convention, but that if we had a virtual convention, it would be deemed by some states as a violation of our own bylaws. The bylaws are clear that we can amend the bylaws in convention. Therefore, as long as we follow the proper procedure, which is to begin a convention with as many people who can show up in person and have those people to amend the bylaws to allow that convention at least to be in a virtual convention, and then allow the credentials committee to credential the online delegates. There is no possibility of that being misconstrued. Our bylaws are very clear. Now that leaves us with the question of whether it's advisable to do so. I think we have to do it that way because I don't believe the National Committee has the authority to contravene the bylaws by itself. But what the National Committee can do is facilitate the process by which this would take place, anticipate that the people will want to do it this way, that we will not want to disenfranchise delegates, and that and to do all the testing necessary. And I volunteer to spend as much of my time as necessary to help you to get the bugs out of the system. It's admittedly going to be a longer convention, but by limiting ourselves to the election of the LNC delegates and to the candidates and not spending time on bylaws changes or platform, which I admit requires more deliberation, then I think we can do it.
Dr. Ahmad, while you're recognized, I have a question for you.
Yes,
earlier in the week, I sent out an opinion that since our bylaws require time and place, that in an emergency where we are unable to physically travel to the place, that we can interpret place to mean a Zoom room, such as this one, where everyone is able to be heard and attend together, and that takes away the need to have some in-person small group ratify something that a larger group would later do. From the perspective of the bylaws, if the LNC agrees with that interpretation of place, are the bylaws satisfied to your opinion?
This is a matter of interpretation. I find the argument that you're making quite plausible. I anticipate that some state election boards will deem that it was not plausible and will attempt to keep us off the ballot.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmad. Mr. Weeks.
Yes, hello, James Weeks, delegate, Pennsylvania.
I rise in support of an online convention. We have no way of knowing if or when it will be safe to hold an in-person convention. There's no way of maintaining any proper social distancing measures with an in-person convention so long as this global pandemic is ongoing, especially as evidenced by those on the LNC pushing to hold an in-person convention, as many of our members are conspiracy theorists who believe that COVID-19 is caused by 5G or that doctors nationwide are falsifying death certificates. We need to be able to demonstrate to the American people that libertarians are able to lead this country. And if we hold an in-person convention, not only are we demonstrating that we're incapable of leading, but that we shouldn't be allowed near any positions in government.
Thank you, Mr. Weeks. Mr. Robinson. Oh, that's unfortunate. Thank you. All right, Mr. Gizzarelli. It's okay. Mr. Gizzarelli, you just need to unmute.
There we go. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Cool. All right, I'll keep this brief as I heard the call for brevity. One thing I just want to point out is that being a delegate is not a right, it is a privilege. When you sign up to be a delegate and you get voted on, you are agreeing to go to a convention in person. So everybody that is a delegate has already agreed to go to an in-person convention, okay? There are many reasons why we might have trouble getting to an in-person convention. And just saying this one reason is unacceptable and that is now disenfranchisement, I think is rather silly. Many people have health problems that come up throughout the years, haven't been able to come to conventions and had their voice heard. When you sign up to be a delegate, that's part of the deal. Two is there is value in hearing the voices of the people who actually show up. If anybody can just get on their computer and troll, it'll just be like Facebook. The LP is not the same at a convention as it is on Facebook. We all know that. We're going to turn our national convention into a Facebook trollathon. And on top of that, we won't even know that the people voting are the actual people that were voted to be delegates in the first place. If my grandfather was part of an organization that had an online convention, I guarantee I would be voting in his stead, not him. So I've heard people argue that it's implausible to hold an in-person convention. It is completely implausible to hold an online convention because voting cannot be secure electronically. You need paper ballots, you need in-person. That's why you still have to go to the polls. And even now, libertarians argue that we should have paper ballots at the polls. And in certain states, you have to have them, right? So the idea that we're going to have
Please wrap up.
Yep. Okay. The idea that we're going to have an electronic thing and nobody has any interest in manipulating our votes is kind of silly. The Republicans aren't going to want Amash to win. The Democrats aren't going to want Berman Supreme.
Please wrap up.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I'm done, but I think I made the point.
Thank you. Mr. Clark?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'll keep this very brief. I believe others have articulated why an online convention may be a preferential option for us to move forward with. Whether that be concerns about candidate timing, delegate participation, or the possibility of a so-called rump convention. That aside, whatever decision this body decides to move forward with, I would again like to strongly encourage that it is made today. Many delegates are very disenfranchised with the 1 week waiting period that occurred last weekend. I know I myself have had to communicate with a new job trying to figure out the timing for time off to participate in my role as a delegate. So I would just like to strongly encourage this body to really knuckle down and as long as it takes, try to get the job done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. DeRazio?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Goldstein?
I appreciate your desire to let everybody speak their minds, but we've been at this over an hour already, and I would absolutely like to get to business at some point. And I do see at least one or two people on this list who've already spoken. Can we please set a time limit on this for another 15 minutes, another half hour? But I don't want to be sitting here when the sun goes down.
The answer is no, Mr. Goldstein, but Mr. Arnold will remove his hand because Mr. Arnold has spoken and will not be recognized twice. Mr. DeRazio. Go ahead, Mr. DeRazio.
All right, yeah. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Excellent. Hi, for those who don't know me, I'm Tony DeRazio. I'm the chair of the Libertarian Party of New York. I want to deliver some harsh realities of what's going on in New York and what New Yorkers are going through. This is the state where we have seen the greatest number of COVID-19 cases, 3 times more than your state, even if you live in New Jersey, which is number 2. We are being quarantined in several states for 2 weeks. Feasibly, we will not be able to participate in an in-person convention before September. That's just the harsh reality of all of this. As much as I would love to go to an in-person convention to vote Dulap Nelson for LNC chair, I can't do that. However, a hybrid convention where we have some sort of a press event in September and do the business of the party in some sort of an online format would work great for us. It would work great for a great number of people in the country who cannot travel, be it for health reasons or for poverty reasons. To have the online option, not only for this year, but going forward, would enable some people who are both immunocompromised and also those who are in the povertarian class of libertarians to participate in this process. I think, and that's what I had to say. And the final thing I'd like to say is, I know there's been a lot of venoms spewed towards the panelists here, all you members of the LNC. As far as I'm concerned, you're going to make a decision. We'll abide by your decision and live with it. And I'm very sorry that any venom has been spewed towards you people. I know you're all acting in good faith. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeRazio. Mr. Faust?
Yes, sir. I just would like to say, after attending last night's meeting, I will say that the format used for Zoom was much more reasonable and went far better than the initial test convention, if you will. I do still have some pretty strong concerns about making sure that this is actually a secured process where it's actually credentialed delegates participating, as well as concerns over making sure that there's a secure balloting access. And I would also like to voice another concern that the comments that the chat is distracting and suggestions that we expect people to take those type of discussions to a second platform are likely to be far more distracting than just allowing the chat, function that it's built into Zoom to exist. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Garachi?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's clear that a lot of people are very passionate about their preferences, whether it's online, in person, some combination, and a balance has to be struck. But to put it simply, the delegates need to vote on the presidential and vice presidential nominees as soon as possible for the media to ensure universal ballot access for the sake of their campaigns, whether it's online or in person. That needs to get done. The other business, the new national committee, the bylaws, the rules, I'm not going to say it should wait, simply that it can wait. The public, the average voter, will be much more interested in our nominees than who's on the national committee or what our rules and platform are. So if that wants to be pushed down the road, that's fine, but we definitely need to vote on our nominees as soon as possible. And someone had brought up something about the internet going wonky, people having a hard time with Zoom using it, but just as it's the responsibility of the delegates to plan their flights and transportation and lodging to a physical convention, it's their responsibility to be able to attend an online convention if that's the route we go, which could involve getting an updated router, getting an Ethernet cable, but it's our responsibility to make this work and in person or online, we need to be there.
Thank you, Mr. Garashi. Dr. Levin, then Ms. Crawford, then Mr. Tanevich.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Dr. Alicia Levin. I am a member of I'm a life member of the Libertarian Party. I'm a life member of the California Libertarian Party. And I am currently on deck as an alternate delegate for the convention. My concern is that the kind of interaction that is needed is not happening just as I watch this whole process. So I think that the online is an inferior process for us. If that decision is made that we would have a hybrid convention, and I hope that it's nothing less than that, and I really would like to see an in-person convention. But if it is, I do not want this to become the norm for the Libertarian Party. In the place of an emergency, it is understandable. If it is impossible to hold the in-person part of a hybrid convention, that is understandable, but I do not want to see this become the norm for our party. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Levin. Ms. Crawford.
Hi, I'm Chris Crawford, a delegate from Massachusetts. I want to go on record in support of a convention that convenes online, on time, and that continues in person at a later date. Most of the concerns raised in opposition to this cite problems that actually have solutions. And I really would like to see the members of the LNC focus on solving problems. And I am very grateful for those of you who are doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crawford. Mr. Tunowich.
Good day, Mr. Chairman. Mark Tunievich here, former Libertarian National Treasurer, LNC member, and New Hampshire State Chair. I do rise in support of a 100% online convention. I believe it will prove to be a superior process to the alternatives, especially in terms of our goal of maximizing delegate participation. I know in the case of my wife and myself, for a variety of reasons, it would be very difficult to attend an in-person convention, and I think that's true of many, many others. If indeed the committee chooses some portion of the meeting to be in person, well, I'd vote for Vegas. I'll leave it at that. And by the way, nice to see a lot of familiar faces on the Zoom screen today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for your service to the party. I inadvertently missed Mr. Hopper. Go ahead, Mr. Hopper.
Hi, Jonathan Hopper, Vice Chair of Rockingham County, North Carolina. I'm speaking in favor of a hybrid convention. I'm for personal choice and personal responsibility without limiting the options of elected delegates. If we hold a physical convention, it's up to the people that want to attend to weigh their own risks. And if somebody wants to attend an online option, that's their own choice in weighing their own risks. If that physical location happens to fall through, the contingency plan is already in place to have an online convention because it's going to be hybrid. And yes, I do agree, adding any form of an online option will slow things down, but we just have to bite the bullet and get through it on behalf of the delegates. That's all I had to say.
Mr. Rufo, and then Mr. Flores.
No. Hello, how are you? This is Michael Rufo, delegate from New Jersey, South Jersey, rep to the state board at JLP. I'd just like to throw out there and remind everybody that we are the party that is against centralized planning and understood that this has to be organized, but to leverage the force of the LNC to put other people in a position is unacceptable. And that position would be to have improper voting online. The only framework we should be working within, though I understand and respect everybody's personal fears and emotional appeals to I can't make it because of work and everything, the only framework we should be operating out of is legal. In the event that there is a state delegation that can't arrive because of a legal prevention of so, because of a quarantine or whatever it may be, those are the only people that should be able to participate online. And as Karen Ann said, we should be perfecting that as we move forward. That's all I got.
Thank you. Mr. Flores?
Good morning, everybody. I'm a delegate from Arizona and a candidate for Region 1 representative. I've spoken to a number of delegates over the past several days in polling, and a number of them have noted that they would prefer an in-person convention, but their number one concern or their number one objection to it is that they don't think people will show up. And it's a big collective of people that are saying that they would show up, but they don't think anybody else will. And I think what's another thing that to consider that's important in this time, characteristic of leadership is courage. And we need to act in courage in leadership here. There are people who are willing to show up in person, who have weighed those risks, who have looked at their lives and know that they can take those risks and are willing to do that so that we can make sure that we meet those legal obligations so that we don't meet these ballot hurdles that people have brought up that are legitimate concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flores. All right. It is 1:12. I do not see any other hands up for public comment. Ms. Bilyeu, I'm going to inquire of you. My intent is to proceed as I've stated publicly on the list. I'm going to inquire about what purpose your hand is up for.
I would like to ask that the survey results, the poll results that were submitted to the secretary be entered into the official record.
I don't think there's any objection to that.
I have a question. Which
Yes,
ones are we referring to the ones from the convention committee, or are we referring to all of them that have been sent? Because
I don't know what you mean by convention committee poll.
I was sent some poll information from Mr. Molman.
That's not a convention committee.
Okay, I apologize then. Which polls are we referring to then?
What Mr. Molman sent in and what Mr. Wentz sent in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm curious. So I see a couple other hands. I want to answer any questions before we start proceeding into the business. I would ask Mr. Molman. So I haven't seen any of these survey results. So Mr. Molman, can you just unmute yourself and give us a top line, please?
Yes. The short answer is that we conducted a poll over the past 3.5 days or so. Obviously, if we had had more time, we would have reached more delegates. But the very top line result that probably matters to this body, and I'm pulling it up here, when you weigh the pluses and minuses, if you take, we asked delegates what their favorite option was, what their second favorite option was, and what their least favorite option was. So calculating favorite and subtracting out least favorite for each option, the bifurcation model came out with a plus 32%. The email ballot model came out with about a 5%. 51 state delegations model is -1.5. Unsure was -1.5. That doesn't matter. All online came out, actually all online and all in person, both tied at -17%.
How many delegates?
It was unfortunately fewer than 100. We only had about 3.5 days to conduct the poll.
Thank you. So if you're seeking to ask a question before we get into the procedure that I laid out, I'm happy to recognize people. Mr. Phillips?
A point of order.
Who has the point of order?
Tim Hagan.
Mr. Hagan, yes.
Has the secretary already taken attendance by seeing who's online?
She has not, or she has not said so, but Ms. Harlow.
I always do verbal attendance because just because someone's name on a list doesn't mean they're actually here.
We will do that right before we move into the business. Mr. Phillips?
I have two questions. One, I know Mr. Goldstein requested time for these presenters to speak. Do we know where in the agenda that's going to come up? Is that going to be right away, or?
It would be after the motion to reconsider.
Okay, and then I would like to request, since public comment went overly long, perhaps a 5-minute recess. I know we're pushing the day, but
absolutely. Once I answer all the questions from people about how things will proceed, we will take that recess so that everyone can have
a point of order, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, Ms. Harlos.
You've prioritized a motion that has less notice than another motion that was posted on the LNC list. Plus, from what I can see, you're sponsoring that motion, but motions to reconsider have to be made by a person on the prevailing side. And I've not.
Or who did not vote?
I do not believe so. I looked it up before this meeting.
That only applies in subcommittees.
Standing committees as well.
We're not a standing committee.
We're not. We're a board.
Mr. Brown?
In my opinion, the LNC is a board. It's in the nature of a board, and the regular rules would apply, and a motion to reconsider needs to be made by someone who voted on the prevailing side. The rules in a committee are different, but you are in the nature of a board.
And if I was prevented from voting due to an erroneous, if I was prevented from voting because I was claimed to be presiding and denied the right to vote in the affirmative in order to preserve my right to reconsider, what would that result in?
That's an unusual question, but I think the rule still applies that it must be moved by someone who voted on the prevailing side. If this was a committee, you would have the right to do it without any question.
Thank you.
That would be my opinion, but of course, you make the rulings.
Correct.
And Mr. Chair, continuing on my point of order, there was another motion ahead of time.
There is nothing in between meetings.
Someone gave notice of a...
Ms. Harlos, we were adjourned between sessions. Mr. Phillips?
Point of order.
Point of order, Ms. Mattson.
So kind of similar to what Ms. Harlos was indicating, it was about the agenda of this meeting. So this meeting was called specifically for the purpose of hearing options from the COC. That's why we call this meeting. In the attendees, we do have presenters from those hotels that perhaps Daniel Hayes can help Mr. Fishman find so that they can be elevated to presenters so that we can hear from them. But I believe this meeting was called for a specific purpose. That's the first thing we need to take up. And if anything else requires permission of the LNC, and it's not an agenda that can be dictated by the chair without permission of the body.
Ms. Mattson, a motion to reconsider is always in order and yields to nothing. Dr. Lark?
No one's
have a second point of order.
What is your point of order, Ms. Harlos?
I would ask if that's a ruling on your part, because I do believe you're misunderstanding that. It yields to nothing when it's actually in order to be heard. We have specific notice requirements for our electronic meetings, and you cannot go beyond the scope of notice.
Ms. Harlos, we are adjourned from a previous meeting. We are in the same meeting that was previously noticed. And so there is.
I did the motion to adjourn with a specific purpose. I was the one who made
the same session. That is not the ruling.
I appeal the ruling of the chair.
There's an appeal from the ruling of the chair that it would be
second.
Reconsider the previous motion. I believe.
Point of order.
Mr. Smith.
Point of order.
Or who's the point of order?
We have not taken roll.
We have not taken roll. And actually, I should not be taking points of order. I was just answering questions before we came back from our recess. So, Dr. Lark, did you have a question? Dr. Lark, you're muted. Go ahead, Dr. Lark.
Pardon me, Mr. Chairman. I don't know why I was remuted. There are some questions that I wish to ask our special counsel before I can consider some of the motions that are likely to come up. I know that Mr. Phillips had suggested something. I believe it was Mr. Phillips who had suggested something about executive session. So I would ask that if we adopt an agenda for this meeting, that executive session be something that we go into, because I do have some questions that I think are important and really should be considered in executive session.
Dr. Lark, would it be of assistance to you to have Mr. Hall's cell phone number to call him while we are on the recess?
No, sir. I think that these are questions that other members of the LNC may be able to provide expertise because they involve matters of law involving various states. So besides, even so, it would be something that I think other members of the board would need to hear and I would think would want to hear.
Okay, I believe Mr. Fishman would be able to make that happen, and we could do that in a recess, potentially. Ms. Van Horn, did you have a question?
Yes, motion to reconsider.
Oh, sorry, we're not there yet, but you would want to make such a motion?
I would, but I do also have multiple information on that poll that Ken said. Can I comment on that?
Not right now. We're just answering questions about how we proceed before we take a recess because we've been going for an hour and a half.
Yep.
Point of inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Redpath, what?
I have a point of inquiry on Mr. Lark's, what Mr. Lark is saying.
Okay. You want to know what Dr. Lark was saying, or?
Well, does it pertain to, I was going to say, does it pertain to ballot access laws in the various states? And if so, might it be prudent to have Richard Winger in the executive session?
Dr. Lark?
They may, ballot access very broadly construed. I don't want to go into the specifics, but I do feel that depending upon what this body does, there may be legal challenges. And so, yes, in some sense, broadly, ballot access.
Okay, Dr. Lark, can you?
I'm not sure that Mr. Winger would necessarily. I don't know that it's necessary. It might not be a bad idea for him to be involved.
Dr. Lark, can I just ask you if broadly your legal concerns are related to calling an online convention, calling a convention in a place that is virtual, like a Zoom meeting?
That is certainly part of it, Mr. Chairman. That is certainly part of it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
And I have a point to add to Mr. Lark. I would like Richard Brown to be there as well as our parliamentarian.
Ms. Harlos, that's a request. I will let everybody know that prior to sending the email to the LNC, I did speak with Mr. Hall about any concerns that I saw raised related to calling a convention in a Zoom meeting. Mr. Hayes, or sorry, Ms. Bilyeu, do you have a question about how we proceed?
Not about how we proceed, no, but I would like to hear from the speakers that are lined up that the LNC said they wanted to hear from as part of the actual decision that was made for this meeting.
I understand that. Mr. Hayes, did you have a question, sir, about how we are going to proceed once we can get past our recess?
I mean, I was just going to voice something similar to what Ms. Bilyeu said. I think it would certainly affect the motion to reconsider. And we just had 30 to 50 members for public comments speak because we thought that was important. I think members would feel disenfranchised by not hearing from the various venues that are ready to hold conventions for us. So
let me ask this, and this is sort of an indulgence of the body question, and it's not totally regular parliamentarily, but we did get a lot of public comment from people that provided information that we didn't have at the last meeting, which is why anyone would make a motion to reconsider, because they got information they didn't have when they made the decision. Information about what the physical locations would look like and what the proposals would sound like, I think would be valuable even prior to thinking about the motion to reconsider. I think it would be valuable to know what we're comparing to what we're comparing. I think that would be fair, and if everyone else will indulge me, the way I would suggest we proceed, we will take our recess. So we're not doing anything voting yet. So we'll take our recess. We will come back and do presentations from all of the presenters that have been lined up to speak to us and tell us what options we would have for an in-person convention. And then we will start the business portion of the meeting. Is there any objection to that procedure? I see no objection. If it's okay with everyone, I would like to take the recess now until 1:30. I'm going to give you guys a solid 15 minutes because we've been really, let's all, and now let your presenters get set up. We can make sure Mr. Fishman's got them promoted to panelists. But for the next 15 minutes until 1:40 p.m. Eastern time, we will be in recess. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Dan, this is Daniel Hayes speaking. Okay, so I see Ms. April Russell with the Omni Atlanta. Let's get her promoted. Let me scroll down here. I think Miss Nina House, she was here. They've been waiting a long time. So yes, Miss Nina House is still here. She is with the Atlanta CDB. Let's get her promoted. HOUSA. And then also Miss Katie Murray is here also with the Georgia World Congressional Center or something along those lines, but the very large convention center in Atlanta. So let's get them up. And the next we would do the ladies from New Orleans. I see, and we may want to present them later. You just might want to have the list, but I see Michelle Mignard with the New Orleans Convention Center is still here. And then Susan Ives with New Orleans and Company. It's a convention center, there's a Convention and Visitors Bureau, and Susan Zimmerman with the New Orleans Hilton. The Hilton Riverside, because New Orleans has a lot of Hiltons. Then next, let's see, Mr. I am not seeing anybody from the Omaha group, but let's see. So with Shingle Creek, the Rosen Shingle Creek, yes, Mr. Douglas Gilstrap is here, and he is Gilstrap. And I'll see if I can get the gentleman with. Okay, so Ken Mulman, do we have, because I think you were going to share this, you should be prepared to share on screen the stuff for Atlanta, I think.
Yep.
Okay.
I have.
Okay. Yeah, no, go figure. Why might that be, Dan? You might be ready for the Supreme Court, so go get it done.
How about a gallon of coffee?
And anybody that's wondering what I'm talking about, Google Supreme Court toilet. Just saying.
Hey, Daniel.
Yes, Ken.
Are we starting with the short form proposal or the?
Yeah, do the short form. Well, I mean, we could show the convention center and then Omni. Do you not have the stuff for the convention center?
I have that too. That's what I'm asking. Which one do you want me to start with?
Let's start with the convention center first.
Okay, Dan and Ken, do you guys have the numbers? And if so, could you send the numbers for F&B and all that over to the LNC?
So that should still be on that.
Oh, okay.
Ken could resend it, but it should still be on that same Google Doc that was there.
If you could resend it, that'd be great, because I think I've already
Absolutely. Hang on, Stephen. I'll get that. I'll just send it to the whole LNC. Or is Ms. Harlow still here? Karen Ann, are you still here? Or are you on break? All right, I'll just send it back out. Otherwise, I would have sent it through Karen Ann, but. One of these windows is not like the other. Oh, there's it. Got that right there. Cool. Stephen, I'm going to share it with you and with Karen Ann, and then anybody else who needs it can, it's a link for people that know where the link is, kind of thing.
Awesome. Awesome.
But I don't know that we want to share this publicly or not. I don't know. Daniel Hayes?
Probably not.
Okay.
You know, I mean,
just making sure
the whole
that the
thing,
LNC members
because the proposals, the full proposals are in there and all that kind of stuff, and
right.
So
just making sure that we know. Invitation and Secretary Stephen Michaela, whatever. That's so dumb. Stop it. Send the link. Yeah. Stop. So good. Stephen, let me know if you don't receive that here in the next minute or so. It's coming to your LP email. I gotta pull up my. I have way too many things open.
Got it. Just received.
Excellent.
Dr. Lark, if you are at your computer. He's not.
Somebody sharing great.
Yeah, Doug jumped the gun.
Okay.
He's testing. Yeah, good time to do it. Just testing, make sure it pops.
It's all good. Well, at least we know it works. Yeah, we know it works.
Doug's ready.
Sorry about that. I was just doing a run through.
You know, we're in recess.
That's all good. I just didn't know who was doing it. So, yeah.
At least I know it works.
We're just glad you're still awake.
Actually, this is fascinating for a non-Politico.
That's what people tend to say. You know, the AV guy we have contracted or had contracted for Austin was talking about he'd been all around the world, you know, over 30 years of doing AV stuff. And like he's even been in one, I think it was in Europe somewhere at a meeting, and people started throwing their shoes into other things at each other. And he had done our AV in New Orleans at our midterm convention in 2018 and said he's never seen anything like it, talking about our deliberative process. So,
well, like I said, as long as it gets to a goal, right? So,
something like that. So, anyway.
Yep.
And just checking with Katie, Nina, and April. Are you guys ready to roll?
I am. I'm here and ready.
Okay, so we got Katie. Okay, yeah, and the first thing we're going to pop up there, so you can talk about, I guess, in general, the convention center, what's going on with that, and I think April may still be around because I know she had some time constraints, and this went a little bit longer than we expected.
Daniel.
Hey, I'm back on here.
Hey, April.
Daniel, I'm going to share this and make sure it's the right thing.
Okay.
It should be saying space outline.
Yeah, there's that stuff in there, and so. Yep.
Okay, that was the first page of this doc, so I don't know where we want to start, but
scroll down so people know what they're talking about. There we go. Oh, maybe not.
Is this the wrong one?
Keep going. No, that's fine. Yeah, actually, no. Yeah, so let's start with the cover, that kind of cover page there, and then Katie can potentially direct you around through that. Anybody that's listening currently, Katie. And I'm remembering it's Murray, right? Murray. Yes, Ms. Murray had so much time to prepare for this. You know, it's not like she had gone to visit her parents that she hadn't seen in a while and didn't bring any presenting type clothes. But she's being versatile, has her headshot there, looking very, very professional. So
we're gonna make it work.
Way to roll. Way to roll. None of us have had to deal with any sorts of unusual challenges during this whole thing, ever, except for every day. So
it also?
Yeah. And just checking before we get there, since they'd be next. Susan, and Michelle, you guys are ready to roll?
We're ready.
Okay, I figured y'all were, and we already know Doug stuck his 2 cents in. So, all right. So let me go see if I can find someone from Omaha.
Omaha guy. Yeah.
Daniel, how many do we have altogether? 4 or 5? 4?
4.
10 minutes each? 15 minutes each? What do you think?
That is not my purview, but just the chairman's there.
15 sounds good to me. Sorry, I'm away from my screen, but not really. I think 15 each. It's a balance of presenters can use their time as they choose. If they want to use 3 minutes to present and then take a bunch of questions, I will, if I can, figure out. It's difficult for me to take questions while presenters are happening. So I think once the presentation's over and the screen share is over, then I can go back to traffic copying for questions.
Mr. Chairman, I think certainly the LNC members would be able to have questions, and if maybe members had questions, they could field them through them potentially.
Yes, so I'll only recognize members of the LNC, both for the interest of time and also because we're past public comment during the presentations. And we have 4 minutes to go, so I'm going to go finish up what I was doing.
Nick, and the COC, if you would, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, and the COC, sorry. Well, without objection to the body, sure.
Yeah, Nick, quick question before we start. Would it be procedurally necessary to have a preemptive motion to extend? If you're going to give them an hour, that'll take us to 2:30, but the meeting's only scheduled till 2.
No, because I think when we made the motion to adjourn, we said specifically that day that we were going to take as long as necessary to get it done. I think the registration link still said 2, but I anticipate, I blocked out a solid 4 hours today with the ability to be flexible.
Okay.
All right. 2 minutes.
And I'd just like to point out, Richard Brown could confirm this. He went up to the state capitol where our legislature is holding in-person hearings currently. All kinds of different protocols in effect, but.
Yes, Mr. Hayes is correct. They were using, they had the members of the public spaced out quite well, and they were using a second meeting room for overflow. They were practicing.
Hayes, just direct the presenters. Or what was the order? I wasn't here when the order was determined.
Daniel, you're muted.
So we were doing Atlanta, New Orleans, Omaha, but I do not see them in the Zoom and